In our second segment of our three-part series detailing soybean production in Argentina and Brazil, this week we'll look at growing conditions in each country. Farmers in both Argentina and Brazil expect to mirror the U.S. in 2014 in that margins will be tighter than during previous seasons. In Brazil, a caterpillar caused trouble early in beans, and in Argentina, concerns over precipitation were starting to emerge during our mid-January trip. There are stark differences between here and there. The use of crop insurance isn't widespread, and irrigation is sparse. As you'll see, the benefits and challenges for both countries are very different than those in the Midwest. This is the beginning of soybean harvest in Brazil's largest producing state of Mato Grosso. Unlike the mythical pictures, the combines don't move in a V formation with planters chasing behind. But the field is so large that you can't accurately count the number of machines working. Farming here is measured in hectares. 1 hectare equals about 2.5 acres. Here in Mato Grosso, how much land does the average farmer have or use?
The big ones, they raise 2,000 to 3,000 hectares, and they account for 25% of the land. And most of the farmers, 75%, are small and medium farms, and they have like small farms like 10 to 20 hectares, and they still planting the rotation between soybean and corn.
The government-funded Embrapa conducts ag research on crops and livestock across Brazil. It says this area of the country receives about 100 inches of rain a year. That adds to warm weather, culminating in good to great growing conditions for soybeans. It also takes some of the risk away and can impact whether producers buy crop insurance.
Here in our region, it's really hard to lose with our crops. You just lose because of when there's too much rain. But even then, it's just once in every 10 years that you might lose money with your crop. So that's why I don't really use crop insurance myself.
Evolgier estimates less than 10% of producers around his area utilize crop insurance. He believes the government-issued insurance is too expensive and believes it should provide a better subsidy system to incentivize more producers into participating. Evolgier says he's farming more than 8,500 acres of soybeans this year, followed by a second crop of corn. It's uncommon in this area to see a first crop of corn. Brazil is expected to have planted about 16 million acres of corn for the first harvest, compared with more than 22 million acres for the second harvest. The total acres planted for soybeans is about 73 million. While Argentina will rotate crops, it still leans heavily on soybeans. The ratio to corn is about 6-to-1.
We started with soybeans during the 80s. And now we don't have a real balanced situation between soybean and other crops. We have to change that.
Santiago del Solar Dorrego owns land across Argentina and says there are reasons why farmers have shifted so dramatically towards beans. Soybeans are cheap to plant, especially since most farmers use no-till. With good rains in the Pampas region north of Buenos Aires, yields can be between 4 and 5 tons per hectare, or about 59 to 74 bushels per acre. And government quotas on exports of other crops influence planting choices. Not many Argentine farmers own harvest equipment, so they'll contract to have their crops picked. The soybean harvest will start in the north and move south, with the peak occurring in March and April. Juan Elizalde manages a farm growing 4,500 acres of soybeans. The total will be split between first and second crops. Juan says there can be a noticeable financial difference between first and second soy.
The biggest difference is in labor. Labor specifically related to spraying, less spraying in second crop, and the lesser use of ag chemicals. The difference is about $50 less per hectare in second soy than first soy.
Juan says this farm receives about 40 to 45 inches of precipitation annually, but rain is by far the biggest factor in limiting yield. Irrigation isn't widely used in Argentina. As of 2009, only 4 million acres were equipped for irrigation. The long growing seasons of South America mean farmers here can get 2 crops during 1 year. But in areas like Mato Grosso, the climate also makes farmers battle insects year-round.
The number of generations we have here, the tropical climate, it's really easier for the insects to multiply. So we have this number of generations, so we have resistance going through all the generations. So probably this is the biggest difference.
Last year, one pest caused almost $1 billion worth of damage to crops. The Helicoverpa caterpillar emerged again towards the beginning of this growing season and made headlines. While the experience last year helped some farmers control the caterpillar this year, Ivo Girbagin says protecting his soybeans from the Helicoverpa accounted for a large share of increased production costs.
So for this year specifically, what impacted our cost of production a lot was the pests, the Helicoverpa to start with, and then later we also had another pest that caused some damage to our crops, so we had to spend a lot more money to control those pests this year.
Ivo Gir expects his beans near Sorriso will yield in the low to mid-50s in terms of bushels per acre, but farmers in both South American countries are very aware of profitability levels in 2014. The growing conditions vary greatly among the three top producing soybean nations. Roberto Negrini manages a farm near Sinop in Mato Grosso. His fields were some of the first out in this area and yielding a little less than 50 bushels per acre. Roberto has visited farms in Iowa and Illinois and says production between the U.S. and Brazil is similar, but operations in the U.S. have lower input costs. He also says the most noticeable disparities take place after the harvest is over.
And then the other big difference I noticed was in terms of logistics. In this case, that's a real big difference. A lot of farms in the U.S. with their own silos and dryers, so they can be much faster and more efficient after they harvest the crop and send the crop away. One thing that is very different is roads and the transportation. In the U.S. is way better than what we have here in Brazil. But maybe part of the whole this whole issue is just that producers in the U.S. have been growing grains for much longer than we have here in Brazil, and especially in our region here. So maybe with some more time here in Brazil, we might be able to catch up with producers in the U.S.
We'll explore that issue in depth next week during our final installment of our series. It'll detail the difficulties farmers face after harvest. For those in Argentina, that includes a 35% export tax and a rapidly fluctuating currency. We'll show you how producers are now holding their soybeans on site to fight the devaluation. In Brazil, the lack of adequate transportation has proven to be a large expense for farmers and could hinder further soybean growth in the country.